2741 Recruitment Speech. Sunny remained motionless for a few seconds, glancing around Lightslayer's messy lair, then gave her a nonchalant smile and made a move to sit gracefully in a soft-looking armchair. Noticing a small pile of unidentifiable wrappers occupying its seat, however, he lingered for a bit. Eventually, he let out a sigh and summoned his own chair to sit down. Revel gave the shadow chair a long look, then mumbled something under her nose and continued to glare at him. "What do you want?" Sunny shrugged with a smile. "As I said, I need your help with something." He remained silent for a short while, then added in a neutral tone. "Imagine that there is an enemy whose name you cannot say. Every soldier you send to fight the adversary becomes one of their own. The enemy can be neither reasoned with nor killed. In order to defeat them, you must forget that they exist first. How would you destroy such an adversary?" Revel stared at him for a while, then grimaced and went to sit on her bed. "So, the Dreamspawn is back and giving you trouble." Revel's tone gained the cold, threatening arrogance Sunny was used to. Needless to say, it was in dire contradiction to the way she looked. His smile widened a little. "See, this is why I knew that dealing with a former princess of the Song domain, the first of them to become a saint, no less, would be a pleasure. You already know so much." She studied him with a dark expression, then shrugged. "There is only one creepy supreme whose name I was taught never to mention. Plus, Song of the Fallen recently visited to ask Seishan a few unexpected questions. It would be difficult not to know what you are talking about." Sunny nodded in understanding. "Still, can I ask something?" Revel simply scowled, which prompted Sunny to give her a contemplative look. Quote. "How does one accidentally seduce someone? And what about that Duke, has he no standards?" Revel's chilling glare instantly returned. "Shut up." Sunny laughed. "Well, he understood, somewhat. Revel's flaw prevented her from walking under the sun, and there was no electricity or network in Ravenheart. It was no surprise that she had turned a bit reclusive, passing time by engaging in the few shapes of entertainment a saint could have easy access to in the dream realm. Still, would it kill her to at least clean up after herself? He grinned. "In any case, yes. It has not even been 2 years since the domain war ended, and now, we are facing the possibility of a new one. You play quite an important role in the military endeavors of the Longing domain, however, at the moment, I need you more. I need someone both powerful and capable to lead the clandestine operations of my clan." Revel smiled darkly. "No, thanks, I am doing quite well for myself right here." Sunny glanced around with a dubious expression. "I wouldn't say that living in your mom's basement after, what are you, pushing 40, constitutes as doing well, but what do I know? I do admit that this has been your home for a long while. But we all have to leave the nest one day." Revel smiled coldly, then said in a perilous tone. "Keep talking, Lord of Shadows." Sunny coughed. "What I meant to say was, don't refuse me before you hear what I'm offering." Her smile disappeared like a winter mirage. "And what would that be?" He leaned back, crossing his arms in a relaxed manner. "Well, first of all, I am offering you the title and position of an elder in the Shadow Clan. The elder, really, since there are no other people of your caliber in my domain. The power and authority that come with that title are no joke, so consider it carefully. Oh, and there's also a lot of important work to do. So, you'll probably never be bored again." He raised a hand and extended 2 fingers. "Secondly, there are various benefits to becoming my subject. Money, luxurious accommodations, a cool tattoo. You will gain the Mark of Shadows, and all the powers that come with it. Granted, they won't be that impactful in your case, both due to your power and the nature of your aspect." Sunny extended a 3rd finger. "And lastly, I rule an entire region of the dream realm where there is no sun. It's a land of everlasting darkness, where your flaw would not be able to catch up to you. You can roam the Forgotten Shore freely instead of staying in this cold basement. Doesn't that sound fun?" Revel stared at him incredulously for a few long seconds. Then, she said in an even tone. "I like my basement, though." Sunny cleared his throat. "Oh, well, in that case, a better basement can be arranged. There's a lot of prime real estate in my city, you know. There's a stunning historic cathedral, a demonic castle, countless unoccupied mansions, hell, there's even an entire system of catacombs, if that's more your style." He remained silent for a bit, then added in a more serious tone. "The Shadow Clan is a modest force now. But in due time, it will grow to become the secret weapon of the human domain, a pillar that supports it from the darkness. I won't always be there personally to rule it, either. So, I need someone to lead it while I am away. Sunny smiled. I'll already have someone handling the administrative side of running the secretive arm of the human domain. However, I need someone to take charge in the field, as well, a champion to lead my followers on the battlefield. He roused, the smile draining from his face. And I need that person now. Because the situation is possibly going to turn quite dire soon. When that happens, nobody will be safe. Not you, not your sisters, and not even me. Leaning forward a little, he looked at her silently. So, what do you say, Lightslayer? Are you going to work with me? I hope you do, because, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. Even with 7 bodies, one of me is not enough. Revel stared at him for a while. Eventually, she sighed and hugged her book. Actually, you had me at various benefits and a cool tattoo. 2742 Swallowed by shadows. Sunny's servants moved in the shadows of humanity, unseen. The members of the Shadow Clan were spread out across both worlds, embedded into all layers of society. Theirs was usually a quiet kind of work, with high-intensity missions happening surgically after months of careful preparation. On a moonless night at the peak of summer, things were transpiring in the same manner. Only, this time, it wasn't only 1 or 2 cohorts participating in the clandestine operation. Instead, the entire Shadow Clan had been mobilized in complete secrecy, with dozens of elite awakened teams preparing to descend upon the adversary from the darkness. In Bastion, Quentin led his men to surround the Church of the Moon as the electric light of the street lamps flickered and died out, plunging the city into the embrace of shadows. Somewhere else, Rain and Tamar were preparing to assault the hidden base of a black market auction, accompanied by Ray and Fleur. In NQSC, Kim had donned her armor and led a cohort of awakened warriors to a fortified compound of a minor legacy clan, the street cameras conveniently falling victim to interference as they passed. June and his people had boarded the Night Garden only a few days before, and were now quietly making their way through its cavernous cargo holds. In Ravenheart, the members of the Shadow Clan shivered and looked back with terrified eyes as a breathtakingly beautiful woman in dark leather armor walked between them with arrogant steps, torrents of darkness swirling around her like a terrifying storm. Their voices were full of awe. It really is her, the Lightslayer. Princess Revel is with us. Gods, leave it to Boss to con Dark Dancer herself into becoming one of his lieutenants. As expected of the Dark Lord, I guess. Hearing the last one, Revel snarled quietly and gave the man a menacing look, which made him pale and shudder with his whole body. Are you done gossiping, fools? If so, proceed to reinforce the other teams. I will handle the bridge operation alone. Somewhere else, an incarnation of Sunny and Aiko were standing in front of a vast table, with manifested shadows rising and falling on its surface to show hundreds of small figures moving to surround thousands more. The Shadow Clan did not only possess the skill and strength of its elite warriors, of course. Its main power was the near omniscience of the Lord of Shadows, whose senses could spread across vast distances, unearthing hidden secrets and supplying his servants with a detailed knowledge of the enemy. They also wielded memories he had forged, could travel between the worlds through 7 hidden dream gates, and were accompanied on THEIR missions by the incarnations of their lord. Now, as well, 6 of Sunny's avatars were escorting those of the Shadow Clan members who had to assault the most dangerous of Asterian's sleeper cells. He could augment his people, if need be. He could also summon shades and shadows to help them, even if that would risk revealing hints of his existence to the outside world. So, Sunny hoped that he would not have to act personally today. This is such an enormous mess. Aiko's voice was laced with fatigue. It was no surprise that she was exhausted. After all, it wasn't easy to coordinate a simultaneous assault across 3 continents and various regions in the Dream Realm, especially if it had to happen in complete secrecy. She had received help from Cassie and Jet, of course, as well as from Revel and Sunny himself, but he had not been shy about pushing more work on his trusted assistant. You know, Aiko stared at the moving shadows with a distant expression. Back when you hired me to run a memory shop, this was not what I imagined my job would be. Gods, how did I end up here? Why am I even helping you kidnap thousands of random people? Sunny looked at her thoughtfully for a few moments, then smiled. Because of my charming personality. Aiko gave him a long stare, then gasped. Oh, gods, I've been conned, haven't I? He grinned. What, you're only figuring it out now? Chuckling, Sunny turned back to the table. Still, I'd say that you're being compensated quite well for all the trouble. It's your own fault for being so good at this stuff. Noticing that most of the Shadow Clan members were in position, he sighed and erased the smile from his face. It's time to begin, then. Aiko closed her EYES with a grimace before activating the communication memories. All shadows, advance. On the table, hundreds of small figures exploded into motion. All lights went out in the Church of the Moon as cold wind threw the windows open. The people gathered inside were instantly blinded, but those who entered through the windows could see perfectly well in the dark, so they did not waste any time rushing forward with noiseless steps. In front of the vault of a secretive auction house, the awakened guards suddenly heard a beautiful voice that seemed to belong to a young woman. In the next moment, they found themselves unable to move, see, or scream. All they could do was stand there, frozen in terror, and listen to the subtle sound of approaching steps. The heavy reinforced gate of a legacy clan's manor opened despite being sealed with a master command, and armed figures poured in. The few awakened retainers who patrolled the grounds fell victim to paralytic memories before even making a sound. The security systems, both high-tech and magical, were disarmed in a matter of moments. Within a single minute, the invaders were already entering the house. A sea of impenetrable darkness suddenly flooded the stone headquarters of a newly formed battle sect in Ravenheart, robbing everyone inside of sight. Before the awakened initiates had time to react, chilling screams shattered the silence, and a harrowing sense of coldness grasped their hearts. In the depths of the night garden, a sudden explosion bloomed, illuminating the darkness of a remote cargo hold where a group of sinister smugglers had built their secret lair. Corsair, that bastard, why do things keep exploding when he's around? Aiko slammed her dainty fist into the table. Sunny coughed, hesitating to answer. He couldn't really comment, because he knew someone like that himself. 2743 Happy to stay. Standing on the great wall of the dark city, Sunny gazed at the starless sky. A vast black void loomed above the forgotten shore, endless in its dark eternity. Today, a beautiful demon raced the winds across the black void, basking in its endless lightlessness. Some time later, Revel landed on the parapet of the battlements near him. In her transcendent form, the dark dancer was like a demoness sculpted out of pure darkness. Her height had increased to nearly 4 meters, her raven hair seemed to have grown much longer, and 2 obsidian horns protruded from her head, curving slightly. 2 black leathery wings extended from her back, crowned with obsidian spikes. Looking at those deadly talons, Sunny could not help but shiver while remembering the sensation of them piercing Saint's flesh like it was paper. Revel inhaled with full chest, then exhaled slowly and turned the gaze of her tenebrous eyes to him. It's really true. She turned back to FACE the starless sky and sighed. A land without a sun. Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then smiled faintly. Technically, there used to be a sun here. But Nephis killed it. Revel did not respond, so he looked at her and asked. So, do you like it here? She chuckled and remained silent. After a while, though, she did speak. Like it? Yes. More than yes, really, it feels like this place and I were meant to be. Funny, isn't it? Seishan spent a decade trying to escape from here, but here I am, happy to stay. Revel looked down. Few of us orphans have come this far. Some perished in the first nightmare, some fell later on. And those who remain all bear their curses, their flaws. Seishan's flaw might be the heaviest, but mine is the cruelest, I think. She looked at him. What about you, Lord of Shadows? How heavy is your flaw? Sunny raised an eyebrow. Among the awakened, asking about one's flaw was considered to be extremely rude. But then again, after witnessing Revel in her natural habitat, he would have to be a fool to expect grace and decorum from her. He shrugged with a smile. It definitely shaped my life in ways I did not expect. All of it felt terribly unfair back then, but now, I think it was for the best. Sunny looked at the vast expanse of the forgotten shore stretching in front of him. Revel studied him for a few moments, then asked, "Do you like it here yourself?" He chuckled. "I'll like that this land offers me an inherent advantage over anyone who would try to invade it. I also like ruling over a land that failed to kill me. 1am quite a spiteful person, you see. Being the Dark Lord of the Forgotten Shore brings me quite a lot of vindictive joy." With that, Sunny shook his head. Which is not to say that ruling the Forgotten Shoji does not bring me a lot of headaches, as well. This place does not really make sense, after all. It is fine that there is no sun here, but how does the weather stay temperate without a sun? Hell if I know. Most of the water disappeared when the Dark Sea was sealed, so I need to procure it somehow. He pursed his lips. There's some groundwater left, but it is too deep to dig wells. The whole place is basically a desert, which means that, in theory, nothing is stop rowing the nightmare desert from swallowing it. Should I be worried about desertification? Once again, no clue. There are more issues like that. Sunny finally looked down, where an enclosed settlement had appeared beneath the wall of the Dark City. His expression became complicated. For now, we've been importing water and food supplies through a dream gate, but that is merely a temporary measure. I would like to make the Forgotten Shore self-sufficient, and on top of that, there won't be a source of supplies on the other side of the gate in the future. Because there won't be a waking world in the future. The settlement had been built out of manifested shadows. It wasn't anything special architecture-wise, but Sunny had at least made an effort to make the buildings look similar to those in the Dark City. His experience of creating shelters in Ariel's game had been of great help, so the result was decent. Best of all, the shadows he manifested were durable enough to be a nearly indestructible obstacle for humans of the awakened rank. Considering that the settlement was meant to serve as a prison camp, or a quarantine facility, if he wanted to be glib about it, that was quite satisfactory. Of course, there was a difference between creating a comfortable shelter for himself and Kai and building a settlement meant to house thousands of humans. There had to be some kind of sewage system, for example. Trash had to be collected and disposed of, food had to be prepared and distributed, there had to be running water, and since he didn't want the prisoners to die of boredom, there also had to be some forms of recreational pastime available, and much more. Luckily, Sunny had already accumulated some relevant experience while arranging proper accommodations for the members of the Shadow Clan staying in the Dark City, albeit on a much smaller scale. So, he had managed to make the prison camp quite habitable. Which did nothing to diminish its grim nature, of course. I really feel like a villain these days. Looking down, Sunny sighed. Speaking of importing supplies, we need to source way more food and water now. It's a good thing that our friends in the government know how to hide paper trails very well. Revel frowned. You managed to capture all these people without killing anyone, which is hard to believe, good job. But, she gave him a long stare. Now what? Sunny gave her a long look. Now we keep them here until the Dreamspawn is dealt with, while adding more. He did not know how long it would take for Astarion to be defeated. Hopefully, he would not need to expand this settlement, though. 2744 Fear of the Unknown. The attack of the Shadow Clan had been swift, stealthy, and chillingly efficient. They had eliminated all sleeper cells of Astarion's followers in one fell swoop, all of the cells that had been helping his name spread, at least, and were therefore discovered. By the time a new day shone upon the world, half a dozen cults and more than a few fringe organizations had vanished without a trace. Their churches and bases stood empty, and even though there were signs of fierce struggle left inside, no bodies were found. There were no clues and no evidence left by the unknown assailants, either. The number of missing people was significant, but in the grand scale of humanity, they were merely a drop in the ocean. However, it was the mysterious nature of their disappearance that caused the public a great shock. The public became disturbed. After all, it was not every night that a mysterious force entered their cities to snatch up people, with no one being the wiser. The fact that the Firekeepers and the forces of the Immortal Flame Clan had not only failed to prevent the eerie attack, but were also unable to uncover what happened only added fuel to frightening rumors. Observing the frightful reaction of the public, Sunny could not help but remember his own past. Back then, on the Forgotten Shore, wasn't that how the sleepers of the Dark City felt about Harus, the ruthless executioner of the Bright Lord? No one ever saw Harus come to claim his victims, but everyone he had been sent to kill inevitably ended up dead. The fact that there had not been a single witness to explain how the hateful hunchback killed his targets only made him more frightening. After all, what people feared the most was the unknown. Now, Sunny had become the unknown for humanity. How ironic. As for Sunny himself, he was a little disturbed, too. Not only because of the somber nature of the act, but also because of how smoothly everything had gone. He had expected something to go wrong until the very end. He had even prepared to find Astarion himself in one of the hidden lairs. The Dreamspawn was supposed to be trapped on the moon, but who knew? His influence seemed to have no problem spreading. So, it was quite reasonable to assume that the man himself had escaped his seal, as well. The thralls of Astarion had not done anything harmful, continuing to go about their lives as usual. And even now that Sunny and his people had attacked the followers of the Dreamspawn, the man offered no resistance. It was as if Astarion were a pacifist who harbored no malicious intentions whatsoever. Or was simply so confident in his eventual victory that losing a few sleeper cells was of no importance to him. In any case, Sunny did not like it. Capturing the followers of the Dreamspawn had not been too difficult. In fact, transporting them to the Forgotten Shore had proven to be a greater challenge. Still, Sunny managed. And now, the real difficulty would begin. It was the task of keeping all these people safely locked up away from the human population while taking care of them. The prisoners had to be fed, clothed, and watched over. Some would require medical assistance. The thralls had to be separated from ordinary zealots and delivered to the quarantine facility in NQSC, where Cassie would hopefully cleanse their minds from Astarion's influence. Sunny suppressed a heavy sigh. Ah, so much work. It was a good thing that he had a new lackey, a new lieutenant to help him handle all the difficult tasks. Isn't it too cruel? Revel was gazing down at the black settlement illuminated by enchanted lights. There, some of the prisoners were already waking up, staggering into the street from their assigned dwellings. There were no living guards in the prison camp, and no living staff either. Instead, his shades were doing all the work. The only human allowed to interact with the captives was Revel herself. Sunny shrugged. Hey, I already chose the most comely of my shades to take care of the prisoners. Sure, they might be shadows of dead people, but most of those people were radiant immortals of the Eternal City once. I could have chosen dead nightmare creatures, you know. There was nothing he could do about that. Sure, the more humane option would have been to assign at least a few of the Shadow Clan members to take care of the captives, but subjects of his domain were not immune to Astarion's powers, either. If the Dreamspawn could steal the hearts of those who followed Nephis, he could steal people from Sunny's domain, too. So, the members of the Shadow Clan could not be exposed to Astarion's thralls more than necessary. Revel sighed and covered her face with a hand. Going to think that they died and have gone to the afterlife. Sunny glanced around. An empty black void instead of the sky, peculiar buildings made out of smooth black material, and a great dark wall towering above the settlements like the barrier of existence. She's not wrong. If someone attacked Sunny in the dead of night, and then he came to his senses in this place, he would have assumed that he was in hell, too. Sunny offered her a pleasant smile. What are you waiting for, then? Go and explain to them why they are here, and what is going to happen to them. You know, how they'll be treated well and that there's nothing to fear. Revel glanced at him from between her fingers. You do realize how I look, do you? Sunny gave her a stare. Alabaster skin, raven black hair, leathery wing, 2 obsidian horns, eyes that were entirely black. How would he react if someone like that told him that he was definitely not in hell? Sunny coughed. Well, perhaps dismiss your transcendent form first. Shaking her head, Revel spread her wings and stepped off the parapet. He watched her glide toward the settlement in silence, then turned away. There was a lot he had to do. 2745 Scarecrow. Before leaving the wall, Sunny threw one last glance at the settlement below. It shone in the vast darkness of the Forgotten Shore like a sole island of light in a lightless ocean. He could see the small figures of the prisoners wandering the streets, and could sense the dazed movement of their shadows. Numerous were already gathered in the square that served as the heart of the settlement, where Revel had landed after plummeting from the dark SKU. More were hidden in their dwelling, terrified by the sight of the shades that stood guard outside. Sunny let out a sigh. He was full of a bittersweet feeling of irony. Once, a long time ago, the Forgotten Shore had been his prison. Now, he was its ruler. Back then, the people sent to the Forgotten Shore were trapped in the Bright Castle, with no hope of ever escaping back to the waking world. The only way out was the gateway of the Crimson Spire, which was guarded by its ghastly terror, a foe that none of them could ever dream of defeating. Now, the captives were caged in the prison camp Sunny had built, with no hope of escaping either. Even if they escaped the gaze of the silent shades and scaled the unbreakable walls, then made their way into the Dark City, the only way out of the Forgotten Shore was the gateway of the Nameless Temple. And that gateway was guarded by Sunny himself, a being who was infinitely more powerful and fearsome than the terror of the Crimson Spire had ever been. In that regard, the prisoners had it worse. Still, overall, their situation was far better than what the sleepers of the Dark City had endured. After all, they did not have to risk their lives hunting terrifying nightmare creatures to stave off starvation. No nightmare creature would descend from the darkness to devour them, either. They did not have to pay tribute to a bloodthirsty tyrant in order to survive, and neither were they forced to sell themselves into his service. Instead, they could simply enjoy complete safety while being provided with everything they needed to live. Sunny doubted that anyone would thank him for his benevolence, though. No one would appreciate the lengths he and Nephis had gone to in order to avoid having to slaughter these pawns of Astarion. Letting out another sigh, Sunny looked up and smiled. Ungrateful wretches. The bastards did not know how good they had it. As he descended the walls of the Dark City, he shifted his focus to the distant bastion. There, the Ivory Island had long returned from its war campaign in the Death Zone Belt and the Eternal City. It drifted in the blue skies above the Mirror Lake once again, serving as a symbol of hope for the millions of citizens who went about their lives far below. On the day of the Ivory Island's return, the festive streets had been full of celebrating people. They pointed at the sky with awe and delight, welcoming their victorious ruler home. Today, however, the mood in the city was strangely subdued. The news of what had happened last night slowly spread among the population, and while few people felt truly frightened, many shared a heavy feeling of unease. Nefis was looking at her city from the balcony of the ivory tower, a frown creasing her brow. Sunny appeared out of the shadow behind her, walking over to stand by her side. How did it go? She gave him a brief look. About as well as we expected. The reaction of the population was important. After all, undermining their belief in Nefis and the human domain would lower their immunity to the spreading influence of the Dreamspawn. However, in these first few days, it was the reaction of the powerhouses of humanity that carried most weight. The ordinary citizens could hear about the sudden disappearance of a strange cult and feel a bit disturbed by it, then go about their lives as if nothing had happened, but those who wielded actual power were bound to be more inquisitive and were more capable of connecting the dots. They would never simply ignore a large-scale attack that happened in various regions of both the dream realm and the waking world simultaneously, especially since the Immortal Flame clan had not only failed to repel it, but also seemed to have been caught by surprise just like the rest of them. There were very few forces in existence that could pull such a startling act of violence. In fact, such a force was not supposed to exist at all. Naturally, the champions of humanity had to suspect that something sinister was taking place. The harrowing memories of the Skinwalker were still fresh in everyone's minds, so at the very least, they would be wary of a new nightmare creature of similar power emerging to wreak havoc across the world. People who would become wary of an unknown nightmare creature were like a gift to Sunny and Nefis, though. The real problem was those who were a little more discerning, and could surmise that the only entity that could deliver such an eerie blow to the human domain was the Immortal Flame clan and its ruler herself. Nefis sighed. My subordinates are much too clever. I should be overjoyed by how astute they are, really. Sunny put his hands on her shoulders, massaging them gently. What, were they giving you funny looks? She nodded, then smiled faintly. Yes. Seishan, Nightwalker, Wake of Ruin, even Morgan. And many more. It was almost fascinating to see how troubled their expressions were, and how erratic their desires became. After all, they could only see one reasonable explanation for what happened last night, but that explanation was too frightening to accept. The explanation, of course, was that Nefis, the undisputed ruler of mankind, had perpetrated a vicious attack against humanity for no apparent reason, and was now callously covering it up. Sunny sighed. So, what did you do? In fact, he knew what she had done, well, at least what she had been supposed to do. They had discussed it in advance. Nefis had been supposed to blame it all on Sunny, in front of those who were aware of his continuing existence, at least. In front of those who believed him to be dead, she was supposed to pretend to know nothing. Turning her head, Nefis looked at him over her shoulder. She lingered for a few moments, then said in an even tone. Ah, you might be a little angry with me. Sunny raised an eyebrow. What was that supposed to mean? What did you do? Had she gone against the plan? Nefis remained silent for a few moments, then shrugged. I just did not want to defame you. It seemed like a shame, especially when there's already a perfect scapegoat that we could use. Her voice was even, and her expression remained neutral. However, Sunny could feel that there was a calm, but cold edge to her voice, one that had not been there before. He studied her for a moment. First of all, what do you mean, defame me? I actually did kidnap those people. Sunny paused, then coughed. Oh, but thank you. I appreciate the thought. He smiled. There were friends out there who would help you hide a body. As it turned out, there was also a girlfriend out there who would help him cover up the kidnapping of thousands of people. Wasn't it just too sweet? Yeah, sweet was the right word to describe it. Sunny shook his head, trying to focus. Secondly, what perfect scapegoat are you? His eyes widened a little. You didn't. Nefis looked at him silently for a while before responding. I did. Why wouldn't I? So many people disappeared without a trace from the middle of the human domain, and all our allies are asking themselves who would have been capable of perpetrating such an act. There's not a lot of candidates, and so. She looked away with a shrug. I blamed it all on Mordred. Sunny stared at her in disbelief. Sensing his gaze, Nefis spoke in a measured tone. The King of Nothing is powerful enough to pull off such an attack, and sinister enough to be blamed for it. His reputation is so terrible that I only had to drop a couple of subtle hints for everyone to assume that he was behind everything. Looking at the lively vista of Bastion, Nefis smiled. It's his own fault for being such a wicked wildcard. Plus, he might want to hide in the Hollow Mountains and avoid this conflict entirely, but I never promised not to drag him into the fight against the Dreamspawn. One way or another, he'll have to become involved. It's only fair that he starts doing his part by letting me borrow his name. Sunny let out a heavy sigh. Using Mordred as a scapegoat. That was so devious. Why hadn't he thought of that himself? Suddenly, Sunny felt a pang of vindictive joy. I doubt that he'll be happy about it, though. Nefis looked at him, lingered for a few moments, and then raised an eyebrow in sincere confusion. Her response was even. What should I care if he's unhappy? Sunny blinked a few times. She had a point. He could not argue with logic. There's no good reason, indeed. They needed to bolster the morale of the human domain, and nothing united people better than a common foe. Astarion was that foe, but for obvious reasons, Sunny and Nefis could not use him as a scarecrow. After all, merely mentioning him would add to his power. So, the least Mordred could do was act as a scarecrow for them, instead. Internally, Sunny was laughing. It was a proper villain laugh, no less. Ah, how the tables have turned. 2746 Yutra's long shift. Yutra must have dozed off at some point, because now, he was slowly becoming aware of his surroundings. Something was wrong, though. He found himself sitting on an alloy chair in a dark room, wearing a set of comfortable civilian clothes. His memory was a bit hazy, and he couldn't quite remember how he had gotten here. Had he gotten too drunk celebrating the end of the war? Ah, crap, my wife is going to kill me. We're newlyweds, for spell's sake. You're awake, good. His thoughts were interrupted by an unfamiliar voice. Looking up, he saw a metal desk in front of him and a stranger sitting across from him on an identical chair. The man was a bit older than him and was wearing the same kind of unassuming clothes. There was a bored expression on his face and a sheet of white paper in his hands. Yutra was a bit surprised to see paper, since people rarely used it in this digital age. The electric lights hinted that they were in the waking world, so there was no reason to write by hand or print out data. Where? The man interrupted him. I'm awake in Tegrot. You can just call me Tegrot, Yutra. I guess you're full of questions. Here, just read this first. Then, you can start your shift. Yutra accepted the sheet of paper in confusion. There, on its surface, something that looked like a letter was written in his own awkward handwriting. What the? His confusion growing, Yutra read the letter. It said, "Hey, you must be completely out of it right now. Where am I? What happened? Gods, the wife is going to kill me. We're newlywed, for spell's sake. That is what you must be thinking. Right, don't worry, I was exactly the same. This letter is meant to explain what is happening in a concise manner. I am not very good with words, so I'll just write it all how it is. First of all, the war ended some time ago. Our family is doing great. The kids are all right. Oh yes, they tell me that I have a second child now. It's a boy. Congratulations. Secondly, your memory has been wiped because of some creepy mind attack. In fact, it gets routinely wiped due to the kind of work we are doing right now, as a precaution. That's why you don't remember anything. Thirdly, the work. This is a quarantine facility where people affected by the mind attack are being treated. You're both a former patient and a member of the staff. Your job is to help manage the patients. Your boss is Lady Cassia. Yes, Song of the Fallen herself. Can you believe it? I can hardly believe it myself. Lastly, listen to the person who handed you this letter and follow their instructions. This position is temporary, but we still should do a good job, right? Good luck. P.S. If you see a creepy woman in a red dress, don't get too freaked out. She's not a ghost, she's an echo. Still, just in case, try not to get in her way. P.P.S. Hid a case of synthetic beer in the generator room. If you end up drinking some, make sure to replace it before being wiped again. Cheers. Yutra put the letter down and stared at Tegrot with a dazed expression. The man retrieved the sheet of paper, folded it, and put it in an envelope marked with Yutra's name. The envelope went into an alloy box containing a dozen or so similar-looking envelopes, each bearing a different name. Those, presumably, belonged to other workers of the quarantine facility. Tegrat smiled. You're going to share that beer, right? Yutra blinked a couple of times and asked the question that bothered him the most. Is Lady Kashia really our boss? Tegrat nodded. Yes, she's in charge of this facility, actually. Yutra exhaled slowly, then rubbed his face with his hands. Got it. A few seconds later, he asked. So, Tegrat, what are my duties? The facility was located in the depths of a decommissioned underground factory. The factory was bare, ramshackle, and dark, more than a little creepy, really, but Yutra was not complaining. Working in the waking world was a nice change of pace. The work itself was not difficult. Although the factory was called a quarantine facility, it was basically a prison. A few prisoners were transferred here every day and kept in hastily furnished cells until Lady Kashia could treat them. The job of the staff was to watch them, feed them, and escort them to receive treatments. The only peculiar thing about the whole arrangement was that all members of the staff, including the people who delivered the prisoners, were former patients themselves and had to undergo occasional treatments, as well. Yutra was apparently the most senior among them, having been the first cured patient. So, everyone showed him a bit of respect, while some even treated him like an old friend, which felt strange, considering that he did not know these people. The reason for all that strangeness was the mind disease Lady Kashia was treating. They were told that it was highly infectious, and that the only way to cure it was to erase the affected memories. The situation seemed quite bizarre, but so was everything else in the world of the nightmare spell. So, Yutra was not too concerned. Please remain calm. You will not be harmed. I apologize for the inconvenience, but bear with it. You have my word, everything is going to be fine. The new prisoner, a grim-looking woman with an unmistakable air of a government soldier, looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. Judging by the tattoo on her shoulder, she was a former member of the 2nd Evacuation Army. The veterans of Antarctica were tough people, so it was strange to see her so rattled. The woman stared at him for a while, then opened her mouth and said in a hoarse voice. Holy hell, I guess I am alive, after all. Yutra gave her a composed look, then checked her essence-dampening shackles and escorted her to the cell. The woman's name was Rit, and from what she told him, she had been held in some infernal prison camp before being sent to this facility. The camp was supposedly located in a terrifying abyss devoid of all light, where the souls of dead people guarded thousands of prisoners at the behest of a fallen angel who sometimes descended from a colossal black wall. The prisoners were mostly left to their own devices, but the angel would sometimes take one of them to the wall. None of the taken had ever returned. So, when Rit had been taken by the angel, she thought that it was the end for her. After listening to Rit, Yutra could not help but sigh. The woman was clearly disturbed and suffering from serious delusions. The mind attack must have driven her insane. It was a good thing that Lady Kashia would be able to help her, too. A few days later, Yutra escorted Rit to receive the treatment. Later, he was surprised to see her again. Rit was free of the shackles, wearing unassuming civilian clothes. She gave him a polite bow. Awakened Yutra. Sorry to bother you, but I am still a bit confused. Oh, I am Rit, the new hire. Tegrat told me that you'll show me the ropes. Yutra blinked a few times. Right, sure, welcome, aboard. He hesitated for a few moments, then asked. Say, you wouldn't know anything about an infernal prison camp hidden in a lightless abyss, right? Rit gave him a dubious glance. Sorry, but what the hell are you talking about? Yutra coughed. No, nothing. Right, have you already written the letter? If not, let's take care of that first. Yutra, Tegrat, and Rit were sitting on alloy crates in the generator room. In front of them, a case of synthetic beer was already half empty, with empty cans assembled carefully into a neat row. How long does a shift last, anyway? Synthetic beer had a limited effect on Awakened, but Rit was slightly slurring her words. She was a real lightweight. Tegrat took a sip, then sighed in satisfaction and shrugged. A couple of weeks, I think, on average. It depends, really, on what you get exposed to. Yutra had to guard a very talkative patient once, so he got wiped after only 3 days. Rit gave Yutra a dubious stare. Really? He frowned. How should I know? I don't remember. Taking a big gulp, he added an empty can to the row and sighed. You know what I miss? Monster meat. His 2 pals scowled at him. Yutra grinned. I know that every Awakened is sick of it, but me. I can never get enough. My wife and I actually met during our solstice, so as soon as we awakened, she went out of her way to make sure that we only ate natural food. Ah, but I really like the taste of monster meat. Tegrat and Rit glanced at each other, then simultaneously shook their heads. Hey, Rit, I think Yutra is contaminated. He's spouting insane things. Should I report him to Lady Kashia? At the mention of Song of the Fallen, RIT's usually harsh eyes brightened. Lady Kashia, I met her today. She's so. Tegrat nodded. Yes, she is. Yutra could not help but nod, too. A silly smile appeared on his face when he remembered his own interactions with Lady Kashia. To Our Lady, the three of them clinked their cans together and drank from them happily. Although, she would probably be cross with us if she caught us drinking on the job, the three of them looked at each other with concerned expressions. Eventually, Yutra shrugged. Well, good thing she hasn't caught us then. What she doesn't know can't hurt her, right? Tegrat nodded. Right, we should destroy the evidence, though. Rit reached for another can. Yeah, we should hurry up and eliminate this entire crate, for sure. A few days later, Yutra escorted a patient to the treatment room and waited in front of the door. When the treatment was over, he entered the cell, intending to take the patient to the discharge crew. To his surprise, though, the man was unconscious, Lady Cassie was slumped on the chair, rubbing her eyes tiredly. When she lowered her hand, Yutra froze, awestruck. This was the first time he saw their lady without her usual blindfold. He had expected her eyes to be white and cloudy, but they were clear and of a breathtaking blue color instead. Her eyes, just like the rest of her, were breathtakingly beautiful. It was a good thing that Lady Kashia's beauty was so heavenly as to seem unreal. It was as if she existed in an entirely different world from mortal men like Yutra, and because of it, he could only regard her as a sublime being. Someone too sacred to be touched by the dirt of the world. Otherwise, he would have to remind himself that he was a married man every time he saw her. Noticing him, Lady Cassie pulled up her blindfold and sighed. He fainted after seeing me after the treatment. I am sorry, Yutra. I will have to trouble you with dragging this man to the discharge team. He bowed lightly. Of course, my lady. It is not trouble at all. Instead of getting to it, however, Yutra lingered for a few moments. You seem tired, my lady. She blessed him with a soft smile. I am a bit tired, yes. Thank you for noticing. Not to worry, though, there should be fewer patients to treat soon. Yutra was glad to hear it. Still, you should take care of your health, my lady. Take a day off and do something fun. She chuckled. Should I? I haven't been home for a while, so perhaps I'll follow your advice and visit my parents, but not just yet. How can I go home before all of you can? Yutra scratched the back of his head. He didn't remember his previous shifts, so from his point of view, his stay at the quarantine facility had been brief. He still missed his wife and daughter terribly, though. And there was also the son he had not met yet. Let's hope that this mind disease will be cured soon, then. Right, my lady. She regarded him silently for a while, then nodded. Yes, let's hope that it will. Not knowing what else to say, Yutra went to pick up the unconscious mind. Despite what he had told Lady Kashia, there did not seem to be an end to their work. The number of patients was only growing, not diminishing. There was a reason why Rit and a few others had been recruited as additional staff. The facility desperately needed more hands. Come to think of it, I wonder how long I've actually spent here. There was no way to know. Slightly troubled, Yutra picked up the patient and dragged him out of the cell. Yutra was sitting on a metal chair, holding an alloy box in his hand. On the other side of the desk, Tegrat was slowly coming to his senses. A few moments later, his buddy flinched and looked around with wide eyes. What the hell? Where the hell am I? Seeing him completely out of it was a little cute. Tegrat's eyes fell on Yutra, ignited with fear and hostility. Who the hell are you? Yutra grimaced and pretended to clean his ear. By the dead gods, Tegrat. Can you lower the volume a little? My ears are ringing. Opening the box, Yutra fished out an envelope from it and took out a folded letter. I'm awakened Yutra. You can just call me Yutra, though, you must have a lot of questions. Read this letter first, it should clear up a few things. Handing the guarded and uneasy Tegrat the letter, Yutra leaned back and waited silently. Tegrat's letter was way longer and wordier than his own, so it was going to take a while for the man to finish it. As Tegrat read, Yutra thought back to being in the same spot at the start of his shift. He also thought about his letter. His heart suddenly skipped a beat. Oh, right, I need to replace that case of beer. One of the patients attacked Yutra while being escorted. It was a stupid decision, really. Not only was his aspect suppressed, but he was also devoid of changing star's blessing. That was a common trait that all infected shared. Well, of course they did. WHU would Lady Neffes bless some crazies. The fact that the staff enjoyed her care and the patients did not was proof that they were doing righteous work. Even if it felt tedious, sometimes. Yutra was not put out by the attack, but he was sad to see the patient in pain. The emergency team arrived to take the man away. His life was not in danger, but he was in dire need of medical attention. Left alone in the dark corridor, Yutra stared at the blood staining the floor and the walls. There were other, older stains like these around the facility. Had there always been so many? From the corner of his eye, he thought he saw something red moving in the darkness. But when Yutra glanced up, there was nothing there. Frowning slightly, he sighed and went to fetch a different patient. Yutra must have dozed off at some point, because now, he was slowly becoming aware of his surroundings. Something was wrong, though. He found himself sitting on an alloy chair in a dark room, wearing a set of comfortable civilian clothes. His memory was a bit hazy, and he couldn't quite remember how he had gotten here. My wife is going to kill me. Have you come to your senses, Yutra? His thoughts were interrupted by an unfamiliar voice. Looking up, he saw a woman with concerned eyes sitting across from him. She was wearing clothes that were similar to his, holding a folded sheet of paper in her hands. Greetings, miss. I am sorry, but could you tell me where I am? The woman regarded him silently for a while, then let out a wistful sigh. I'm awakened Rit. You can just call me Rit, though. Welcome back, Yutra. Read this letter. First. Soon enough, Yutra started a new shift, although, of course, it felt like the first shift to him. It always did. 2747 Dark City Prison Experiment. The Church of the Moon stood empty, surrounded by an ominous atmosphere. So were the headquarters of a rising battle sect in Ravenheart. One of the meddling black market auctions ceased operation. A gang of dangerous smugglers vanished without a trace, leaving their ill-gotten gains behind. A fallen legacy clan disappeared, its manor offering no clues to what fate had befallen the once powerful family and its numerous retainers. A considerable number of people were missing, but the world moved on. Its steps were a little less confident, but the world moved on nonetheless. Cassie was dedicating more and more of her time to cleansing the minds of the captured thralls. Sunny, meanwhile, was managing the isolation camp on the Forgotten Shore with Revel's help. Holding thousands of people captive was proving to be more of a headache than he had expected. Things had gone well at the beginning, reasonably well, at least. The captives were confused and frightened, but if there was one thing people born in the era of the nightmare spell were good at, it was swiftly adapting to new circumstances even as the world was coming undone around them. The prisoners were unharmed and seemingly safe. There were no nightmare creatures howling behind the walls of their settlement, and no captors coming to threaten them. They had food, water, and shelter, and even if the darkness surrounding them was oppressive, the streets of the settlement were illuminated by bright lights. The shades guarding them were eerie and disturbing, while the beautiful demon who had spoken to them, claiming to be a former princess of song, was terrifying. Because of it, the prisoners were cautious and behaved themselves for the first few days. It was after they had some time to come to terms with their new reality and regain their courage that the problems began. Curse those fools. I can't believe it. Sunny did not care too much about the captives attempting to destroy the shades or escape the camp, but sadly, they did not stop at that. He had expected that the followers of Astarion would be safe on the Forgotten Shore, since there were no nightmare creatures here. However, he had not anticipated that the prisoners would become a danger to themselves. In hindsight, he should have. The captives were all different people, after all, having come from all walks of life. Sunny had simply thought of them as potential thralls of Astarion, but while numerous of them were, they also retained a tainted version of their original personalities. So, placed in an environment without familiar rules, numerous of them began misbehaving. Those who had been criminals in the outside world saw the rest of the prisoners as prey, and those of them who had harbored a perverse desire for power saw the lawlessness of the prison camp as a golden opportunity to elevate themselves by trampling other people. Even though there was enough food for everyone, some attempted to monopolize its sources by force. Others sought ways to control those around them by singling out unfortunate victims and playing insidious mind games. It was a complete mess. Sunny groaned, "Fools, and I'm the biggest fool of all." He felt extremely indignant at the fact that the prisoners were refusing to play nice, but there was no time to voice his grievances. He had to deal with these shenanigans before someone was actually harmed. Sunny could not establish a police force and a judicial system inside the prison camp, but he had his shades and Revel. So, in the end, he had to build an actual prison inside the settlement and lock the troublemakers up. The prison was pretty much the same as the rest of the dwellings, but less comfortable by design. And, of course, the inmates were not allowed to leave. This is just ridiculous. No, but really, how absurd is it to have to build a prison inside of a prison camp? After the captives learned that there were consequences for misbehaving, things settled down for a while. But not for long. Some of the prisoners were criminals, but they were a minority. Another thing Sunny had forgotten to take into account was that most of the people he had kidnapped were zealots belonging to various cults. A couple of weeks after the prison camp was established, Sunny was once again standing atop the wall of the Dark City with Revel, looking down. There was a baffled expression on his face. What the hell are they doing? Far below, on the main square of the prison settlement, hundreds of people were prostrating themselves on the ground while facing the Dark City. Revel gave him an unamused look. They're praying. Sunny returned her stare with complete incomprehension. Praying? What are they praying to? She sighed. The black wall. What is she saying? He exhaled slowly, then rubbed his face. Since when do they worship the walls of the Dark City? No, how does that even make sense? Revel shrugged. How should I know? Since a few days ago. She glanced down with a scowl. I guess it began with the cultists of the moon. They were quite traumatized after finding themselves in a place where moonlight doesn't reach, so they decided that this is some kind of moonless purgatory. And since the only landmark they can see from the camp is this huge stone wall, they somehow developed a weird fixation on it. Eventually, they convinced themselves that paradise lies behind the wall, and only those worthy would be taken to the other side. Revel let out a contemptuous sigh. The belief swiftly spread among the members of different cults, as well. I guess people were desperate to believe anything in order to make sense of what had happened to them. Not like I gave them a perfectly reasonable explanation, right? People, in any case, it was a scene of rare unity. Oh, but there was already a religious schism among them since then. She pointed to another group of people, who were kneeling with their backs to the wall. Those guys believe pretty much the same stuff, but they are convinced that it is hell that's hidden behind the wall, not paradise. Oh, and the weirdos at the edge of the square believe that they're already in hell, so they're busy performing selfless acts as penance. Very altruistic. Revel fell quiet, then added in an icy tone, and all of them are treating me as some kind of divine existence, be it a benevolent spirit or a sinister devil. Sunny let out a groan. How did this happen? No, it wasn't the worst-case scenario, yet. At least these fools were worshipping the walls of the Dark City in Revel. If they had began worshipping Sunny, he would have had to do something drastic in order to prevent Weaver's lineage from acting up. Biting his lips, Sunny glanced at Revel. We're not going to have to intervene in order to prevent religious strife, are we? Instead of answering, Revel simply gave him a dark look. A couple of weeks later, she unceremoniously barged into the throne room of the Dark Castle and growled from the door. We have a problem. Sunny flinched on his throne. Another problem? What happened now? They're not killing each other. I am keeping an eye out. Revel marched to the throne and glared at him from below. Eventually, she spat. Killing each other? No, it's the opposite. I have at least 3 dozen pregnant women in the camp. Sunny stared at her with wide eyes. One of his eyes twitched. A few moments later, an exasperated voice boomed in the throne room of the Dark Castle, echoing in the darkness. You have what? 2,748 herd immunity. The prison camp was proving to be an endless source of problems. Still, after straightening out a few kinks, Sunny managed to maintain it in a presentable state. The prisoners were still frightened and miserable, but at least their lives were not in danger. Even when new batches of captives were delivered to the Forgotten Shore, things stayed civil. The complicated task of separating the actual thralls from ordinary believers was progressing smoothly, as well. Every day, G-Evil carried the identified thralls to the waking world, where the U were taken to the quarantine facility in the abandoned factory. The people helping Cassie run the facility were all former thralls themselves. Coming into contact with the carriers of Astarion's plague meant becoming infected by it, too, so neither the Fire Keepers nor the Shadow Clan agents could be assigned the task, and even the rehabilitated thralls who had volunteered to stay had to have their memories wiped routinely in order to stay free of the disease. It wasn't an ideal solution, but Sunny and Nephies were not in a position to pursue the ideal. They were somberly anticipating Astarion's retaliation. After all, it was unlikely that he would allow them to undo his efforts without delivering a counterattack. But days passed, becoming weeks, and nothing happened. Those days of eerie calm and building tension were more exhausting than open conflict. The Dreamspawn refused to reveal himself. Which was not to say that he was doing nothing. Despite all their efforts, his name continued to spread. Sunny and Nephis had delivered a substantial attack to the plague and slowed down the rate at which it grew. By taking out the sleeper cells of Astarion's followers, they prevented them from actively spreading the knowledge of him among the people. However, the people themselves continued to spread it unwittingly. There were thralls that they had failed to discover, as well, and they were not staying idle. By late summer, various measures Nephis had ordered her people to develop were taking shape. They could not create means of identifying subjects of Astarion's domain, since that would require them to learn who the hidden supreme was and thus become infected by his mental plague. However, they could develop means of telling who was not a subject of the longing domain. And do it at scale. Once the measures were ready to be used, hundreds of thralls were gradually revealed, isolated, and captured. The Shadow Clan agents were busier than ever, and Mordred's reputation continued to plummet as a result, slowly attaining a truly sinister hue. Funnily enough, the tools that revealed the thralls of Astarion had discovered none of his vessels that had to be hiding among the people. That was probably because of the mysterious ritual that Mordred had performed in the Ebony Tower at the end of the second nightmare, making himself elusive to most forms of divination. But he was definitely watching. Sunny had almost expected Mordred to begin haunting every reflection on the Lavori Island to express his dissatisfaction with being made a scapegoat, but the King of Nothing remained suspiciously quiet, hiding in the Hollow Mountains and retreating from the human world. The only sign of his continuing existence was the fact that the population of nightmare creatures in the Ares bordering the Hollow Mountains seemed to be slowly dwindling. There were no corpses or signs of battles to be found, but merchants and soldiers traveling through those lands had reported that they had to fight. Fewer and fewer skirmishes as time went by. In any case, Mordred had chosen to remain quiet. Then again, perhaps he simply couldn't reach Sunny on the Forgotten Shore. There was no light there, after all, except for in the prison camp, and mirrors needed light to cast reflections. Instead of feeling relieved, Sunny felt unnerved by the insidious bastard's silence. The situation across the two worlds eventually reached a state of fragile equilibrium. Sunny and Nephis could not stop the name Astarion from spreading, with more and more people becoming infected by it each day. However, they were quite successful at preventing the infection from bearing fruit by swiftly capturing those of the carriers who failed to resist it and became thralls. The population of the prison camp had reached a peak and plateaued, then slowly began to diminish as more and more thralls were transferred to the quarantine facility. There, Cassie worked without rest, or rather, as much as her reserves of essence all owed, to cure as many infected as possible. Sunny had sent Luster to assist her, but now, he was almost starting to regret that decision. Cassie seemed to be drowning in patience, working herself to the bone. At the same time, she continued to perform her various duties for the human domain, from serving as a mental connection between the members of the cohort to watching over the Fire Keepers, from working on the runic arrays to protect human cities to managing relationships with prominent saints, and much more. The abandoned factory in the outskirts of NQSC might have become her temporary base of operations, but the power of her mind reached far and wide, as if she was in a dozen places at the same time. Of course, it took a toll. The human domain, meanwhile, was gradually growing stronger. More territories were conquered as those lands that had already belonged to humans continued to develop. More people awakened, and more awakened defeated their second nightmares to become masters. The number of saints was also growing, albeit at a much slower rate. The morale of humanity remained high, and was further bolstered by both the continuous victories of human armies and the achievements of those people who were building a new home for mankind in the deadly reaches of the Dream Realm. Not everything was well, of course. As much as the Dream Realm was developing, the situation in the waking world was slowly growing more dire. The cities of Earth were becoming less populous, and the remaining citizens were feeling both the anxiety of being left behind by the times and the fear of watching the world end in front of their eyes. There were more awakened, masters, and saints, but not all who challenged the nightmares returned alive. In fact, the more people dared to challenge the spell, the more casualties it reaped. And even if human armies were victorious, those victories did not come without a price. Many people were mourning the loss of their loved ones, drowning in the depths of sorrow. The anxiety, fear, and sorrow that people felt were like cracks in the human domain. And it was in these cracks that Astarion's influence seeped like poison, claiming new victims each day. Sunny was full of apprehension, waiting for the day the Dreamspawn would finally make his move. But when that day finally came, he still found himself unprepared. 2749 Third time's the charm. Most farewells were sad, but some were also bitter. Rain did not remember parting with people she cared about often, but somehow, the heaviness in her heart felt familiar. She made sure not to show it, though, knowing that today was not about her. Ash softened the sound of her footsteps as she walked through the darkness. In front of her, Tamar's black armor seemed to consume the pale radiance of the luminous memory Telly had summoned. Ray was hidden from sight, scouting the path ahead, while Fleur was walking behind her quietly. Finally, June was defending their small expedition from the rear. The vast and terrifying hollows of Godgrave looked different from how they had during the war. They were currently south of the Road of Shadows, close to the great breach created in the ancient bone by the battle between the four supremes of humanity. Here, the abominable jungle had been turned to ash and banished into the depths of the hollows. The war in Godgrave had ended a long time ago, and yet the scarlet infestation failed to reclaim these lands, as if it was reluctant to approach the ground consecrated by the blood of supremes. The exiles who dwelled in the citadel to the south routinely patrolled this area, hunting down stray nightmare creatures. So, it was supposedly safe enough for a cohort of Awakened to traverse, at least a cohort like the one Tamar had assembled. Still, they were all tense and wary. I really never thought that I'd come back here one day. Fleur's voice was full of a quiet, dark kind of amusement. Looking back at her friend, Rain hesitated for a few moments, then smiled. I remember you saying something pretty similar the first time you returned to Godgrave after barely escaping it. Fleur, you really never learn your lessons, do you? Their healer smiled, as well. Tamar, Ray, and Fleur had been sent to Godgrave by the nightmare spell as sleepers. Later, they came back here as Awakened of the Great Song Army. The Song domain was gone, but here they were once again. This time, they came to conquer the second nightmare and ascend. Tamar had been preparing to challenge a seed of nightmare for a while. There were numerous reasons why she wanted to become a master, like the smoldering desire to restore the dignity of her fallen legacy clan. It was also because that was what the Shadow Clan operatives were expected to do. Tamar and her cohort were just the first ones to actually attempt it. The world was falling apart around them, and only the strong could avoid being buried under the debris. Wanting to become stronger, Tamar had assembled an exceptional and well-rounded team. Some of them were young, but all of them were veterans. Most were armed and armored by the Lord of Shadows himself, while Telly inherited her sole arsenal and skill from the White Feather clan. They stood a good chance of returning from the nightmare alive, a better chance than most, at least. As for Rain, she, obviously, could not accompany her friends into the nightmare. But she could at least escort them to the seat and see them off. She had known that they would leave for a long time, but it still felt sudden. It had caught her by surprise. There was a reason for that feeling of suddenness, as well. Rain threw a thoughtful look at her shadow. Something was strange about the world these days. People went about their lives as usual, but because Rain was innately attuned to the world, she could sense the eerie undercurrents hiding behind its familiar surface. There was a subtle tension permeating the air, and a subtle strangeness about the people. Her brother was not his usual self, either, having become a little more distant and a little more somber. That was why Rain had not been too surprised when he suggested moving the day of Tamar's departure forward. There it is. Having crested a bone ridge, Tamar stopped and peered ahead. There, a blackened ruin was protruding from the ash, left behind by the extinct civilization of Godgrave. The angular stone buildings still stood, even if the people who had built them were long gone. Here and there, molten remains of fearsome Asuras lay on the ground. Deeper in the ruin, signs of devastation were more severe, as if something terrifying had raged in the heart of the fallen city once, thousands of years ago. I guess you really do see in the dark. Telly gave them an envious glance. Despite the close bond between the three young women, Rain and Tamar had not revealed the existence of the Shadow Clan to Telly. All they had told her was that they, as well as the other members of the cohort, were agents of an elite government force that operated in complete secrecy and could not be disclosed. That explanation was not that far from the truth, anyway, since the Shadow Clan was integrated into the government at some levels. Let's go. Ray should be waiting for us at the boundary of the ruins. June, who had been guarding the reed, silently moved forward. I'll take point. Tamar looked at him for a moment, then fell back without saying anything. Soon enough, Ray rejoined the cohort, and they entered the ruins together. It was eerily quiet there, with ancient darkness nestling among the blackened carcasses of crumbling buildings. As they cautiously advanced into the depths of the forgotten city, the shape of a shattered ziggurat that stood at its heart, buried in ash, slowly revealed itself. The seed of nightmare was located on the platform atop the ziggurat, and Rain could already hear its call. For the carriers of the nightmare spell, it was like a rallying call that mesmerized them into challenging the seed. But to Rain, the call of nightmare was a much more sinister and malevolent force. After all, she did not belong to the nightmare spell and, therefore, could not challenge a nightmare. So, to her, approaching a seed only meant becoming corrupted by its darkness and turning into a mindless nightmare creature. The call was nothing more than a siren song that compelled her to dissolve into the nightmare and become a part of it. We should stop here and make the final preparations. The ziggurat was already looming in the distance, towering above the rest of the crumbling structures. Tamar and her cohort spent quite a while standing in silence and looking at its peak, knowing that their nightmare was waiting for them there. Life and death, that was what they were facing. Rain could not help but feel alienated. While her friends looked at the ziggurat, she looked at them, sensing a vast divide separating her from all people. A bitter mixture of emotions flowed through her heart. Eventually, there were no more preparations to be made. Rain looked at her friends and smiled, pretending to be nonchalant and ignoring the real possibility that this was the last time she saw some of them, or all of them. June, take care of them out there. The tall man looked at her with wry amusement, not a hint of nervousness written on his handsome face. I am not a babysitter. Rayan stared at him for a few moments, then scoffed and looked away. Stop trying to be cool, old man. Finally, June's armor of nonchalance cracked. Old, hey, old. Since when am I old? I'm a young man in my prime. Ignoring him, Rain turned to Ray and Fleur. You two, don't you dare hold the wedding in the nightmare. I demand an invitation. In fact, I demand to be a bridesmaid. So, stay alive. Ray coughed, while Fleur chuckled. Don't worry about us. If anything, we are the ones who should be worried. Please make sure that the world is still in one piece when we return. Rain nodded with a smile and looked at Telly. Come to think of it, our spars won't be the same when you come back as a master. Telly smiled faintly, a hint of wistfulness finding its way into her eyes. I guess not. Rain nodded. I'll still kick your butt, though. Telly scoffed and looked at her with pity. Finally, Rain turned to Tamar. There was nothing left to say, she had already said everything she could, and then some. She even named Tamar's sword and armor, as well as assigning them epithets. So, Rain simply sighed. Tamar, she lingered for a while, then said with a pale smile. Let's build roads together again, one day. When all this bloodshed is over. Tamar gave Rain her patented and expressive look, then walked over and hugged her. Sounds like a plan. Letting go, she studied her for a moment. Will you get back all right? Rain forced out a smile. Of course. You know I won't be alone. Tamar hesitated for a few moments, then nodded. Tell him not to worry. You know he will, we'll make him proud. And before Rain could truly come to terms with the parting, they were gone. She stood alone in the darkness, listening to the maddening whispers of the call wash over her mind. Before too long, however, another figure appeared by her side, having risen from the shadows. Sunny looked at the looming ziggurat and frowned. Worry? Who's worrying? These kids are way too overqualified for a measly second nightmare. Why would I worry? Huh? He gave Rain a disapproving look and shook his head. So you shouldn't worry, either. You know, I died about 1,000 times in my second nightmare. And look at me, I'm still alive. Well, one can argue that I'm actually dead, but when has it ever stopped me? Rain turned to him and remained silent for a short while. Eventually, though, she could not help but chuckle. Right, it hasn't stopped you yet. 2750 A lesson in patience. They walked back in silence. Sunny could simply whisk Rain away through the shadows, but she was not ready to return to the embrace of civilization just yet, so instead, they traveled through the ashen expanse of the hollowed-out hollows on foot. It felt nice and nostalgic, reminding her of the long hikes back to Ravenheart they had often taken after her hunts. The pleasant sense of fatigue, the warm feeling of sharing her teacher's company, the pride and satisfaction of having slain a nightmare creature with her own mundane hands. Times had been so much simpler back then. Eventually, her brother stopped near the scorched remains of an ancient Asura and gave it a little kick. These ones are different from the Asuras of condemnation. I wonder what they were called. He sighed. Sometimes I miss being infected by the spell. Its whispers were quite convenient at times, for things like finding out what this city had been called or what kind of deity had ruled it once before becoming swallowed by corruption. Rain lingered for a moment. Azores of Desolation. Tamar had investigated everything connected to the seed quite thoroughly, so she learned how these abominations were called from a saint who had slain one during the war. In fact, she tracked down everyone who had slain nightmare creatures in these ruins and convinced them to share their knowledge with her. She looked at her brother intently. Things like the details of local abominations, memory descriptions, scouting reports from both armies, and so on. But you already knew that, considering that you had helped her with the investigation, to increase her chances of becoming a master. Sunny smiled. Well, she is a subject of my domain, after all. Rain studied him for a few moments, then sighed and looked away. I wonder when I'll become a master, as well. Her voice was full of wistfulness. Sunny hesitated for a short while, then raised an eyebrow. I see that arrogance runs in our blood. Shaking his head, he turned away from the fallen Asura of Desolation and continued walking. I understand how you feel. It must be a bitter pill to swallow, being left behind by your friends. However, you mustn't be impatient. It has not even been 2 years since you awakened and unsealed your aspect. People used to spend a decade preparing to challenge the second nightmare. Things move a bit faster these days, but 2 years is still far too fast. He glanced at her. And that's for the carriers of the nightmare spell, who already walk the path of ascension at an astonishing speed due to its cruel gifts. You are doing things properly, unlike them. So, it is only natural that things are going to take longer for you. Rain smiled bitterly. She followed him in silence for a while, then said, You say that I must be patient, but at the same time, you pushed Tamar to enter the seed earlier than she had planned. Sunny shrugged. I wouldn't have if I thought that she was not ready. Rain glanced at his back and frowned slightly. She hesitated a little before speaking again. But that is not everything there is to it, is it? You hide it well, but I can tell, you are worried. Sunny gave her an inscrutable look. Eventually, he averted his eyes. Yes, there's more to it. I might have been inclined to believe that it would be good for your friends to be away for a while. Rain's frown deepened. So you are worried, after all. She remained silent for a while, then said in a somber tone. I am not sure that I want to know what can make a Supreme nervous. Sunny grinned. Oh, a great number of things. But I am already worried enough for the both of us, so you don't have to feel worried as well. Rain looked at him cautiously. Or you can share your worries and see if doing that would alleviate some of them. He chuckled. Sunny continued to walk across the ash in silence for a while, then said. It's just a new enemy. Well, rather, an old enemy, the newest old enemy I've had. That enemy is a tricky one, too. He's unlike anyone I've faced. He is hidden in the shadows, while we are out in the open. Quite ironic, isn't it? He also doesn't have anything to lose, while we stand to lose everything. All of it makes me uncomfortable. He winced, and then added in a low tone, we recently encountered an enemy that we couldn't kill. And now, we are up against an enemy that we cannot even fight. How can one win a war if the enemy refuses to engage in battle? Rain scrunched up her face, trying to discern what he was talking about. Her brother was a demigod, so it was not always easy to understand his point of view. Demigods had different problems from mortals like her, after all. So, it's like guerrilla warfare. Sunny smiled. Come to think of it, yes. It's somewhat like that. Rain fell into a thoughtful silence. After a while, she said. From what I remember from school, the best way to counter guerrilla warfare is to destroy the enemy's source of power, which is usually founded in the support of the local population. Once you get the population on your side, the enemy won't be able to replenish their numbers, move freely, or hide among the people. Then, you can eradicate the insurgents through a series of targeted offensive operations. Something like that. Sunny stared at her in bafflement. Just what are they teaching you in schools? Why would they teach kids how to counter guerrilla warfare and suppress insurgencies? Rain blinked a couple of times. What else would they teach us? All kinds of situations are possible in the first nightmare. So, children are taught how to handle various types of conflict effectively. Well, at least we were in my school. Granted, it was quite an elite establishment. Sunny kept staring at her for a bit more, then looked away and shook his head. Actually, what you just said made me worry even more. He paused for a moment, because it sounds suspiciously like what that bastard is trying to do to us. Rain scoffed. Who is he talking about? The public was buzzing with rumors about the evil deeds of the King of Nothing, but Rain knew that he couldn't be the enemy Sunny had mentioned. After all, she was a member of the Shadow Clan, too. So, she knew who was behind the seemingly endless string of clandestine arrests, or, simply put, kidnappings. Come to think of it, she had been meaning to ask her brother about what was up with that. Surely, there had to be a good reason. Rain had almost asked the question when her brother suddenly froze. He remained motionless for a short while, and even though Rain could only see his back, she could tell that his entire demeanor had changed abruptly. None of his usual carefree attitude remained, replaced instead by tension and sharp focus, and a hint of anxiety as well. Rain could not help but tense up, too. What is it? Sunny turned to her slowly, his face a few shades paler than usual. His eyes were cold and dark. It's Cassie. Even his voice sounded like it was brimming with cold darkness, and a chilling wind suddenly blew across the hollows, making Rain shudder. The presence of the Sovereign of Death spread like a frigid tide, drowning the ashen expanse around them. Sunny added in an even tone. I just received a message from her. I think it was a call for help.